Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com, and today we're going to be going over a game between Adolf Anderssen and Kieseritzky. Adolf Anderssen being one of the top chess grandmasters in the late 1800s, Kieseritzky also being a very formidable chess master himself. Now this is called the Immortal game. You've probably heard other grandmasters have their own Immortal games, but this is the Immortal game. This is kind of where it all started. So, as far as chess history, this is right up there at the top, but it's an amazing game, and also it's a very aggressive game. So for those players out there that love to play aggressively, love to sacrifice, you're really going to enjoy this game. One of the reasons I like this game so much is because Anderssen decided to play the King's Gambit line, which is a very aggressive opening. It's my favorite opening, and it really allows you to attack your opponent very frequently and all throughout the game, just trying to go after the king as much as you can. So Anderssen started with pawn to e4, Black responded with pawn e5, and Anderssen right away offers up his pawn sacrifice here on f4, and he does this for two reasons. He really wants rapid development. At the same time, after Black takes, White really has control of the center of the board. This pawn here on e5 from Black was kind of controlling these dark squares on d4 and f4, but Black no longer has control of the center of the board. Now keep in mind, White is down a pawn in material, but a lot of times he can make that up later on in the game. Now White here can continue in two ways. The main line is to bring his knight to f3, simple development move, and at the same time getting closer to castling his king on the king side. Anderssen chose the other option, that's bringing his bishop to c4, getting his minor pieces involved in the game, and at the same time attacking this key weakness here on the f7 square. Now Black does have a couple options from here. Kieseritzky chose to bring his queen to h4. Now you don't see this too much in today's chess games, only because it really leaves your queen exposed later on in the game. You're really going to be having your queen chased around, but still a lot of players will play queen to h4 because the king is forced to move to f1. Can't bring his pawn to g3 because then Black could take it with his pawn, and if he retakes, obviously this is going to be very bad for White. His entire king side is just completely blown up. So from here, White is forced to bring his king to f1. So Black basically has to choose if he wants to bring his queen to h4 and have it chased around the board. In return, for White is no longer going to be able to castle on either side of the board. Now in this situation, Black really has three moves. He does have the Brian counter Gambit with pawn to b5, which was played in the actual game, trying to force this light square bishop off this long diagonal that's attacking this key weakness on f7. Or Black could have played pawn to d6, which I prefer, opening up, his light square bishop into the game. Or he could have brought his minor piece in right away with knight to f6. But in any case, Kieseritzky decided to play pawn to b5, which I think is the weaker of the three moves. After White takes, both sides are equal in material, but as you can see, this pawn here on d7 is now pinned down to the king. So this is going to be a thorn in Black's sides for some time now. Now Black did decide after this to go ahead and play knight to f6, developing a minor piece. You always want to develop your minor pieces towards the center, trying to control the center of the board. And from here, White, it was only a matter of time. Anderssen played knight to f3, attacking the queen here on h4 and gaining a tempo. The queen's going to have to, move back and lose a move here. So the queen comes back to h6. Now White really has two moves here. As you can keep in mind here, this pawn here on e4 is hanging. A lot of times you want to develop your minor pieces, so he could have easily brought his knight to c3, simple development move, and at the same time defending this pawn here on e4. Or his other option, which was played in the game, is to bring his pawn here to d3. What this does, not only does it support this pawn on e4, but it also opens a discovered attack on this pawn here on f4 from the bishop. So both of those are completely fine. Anderssen decided to play pawn to d3. From here, Kieseritzky played knight to h5, and he did this for a few reasons. One, it allows his queen a few spaces for breathing room. Obviously, the knight here on f6 is kind of blocking off some of the spaces that the queen can go to. And at the same time, it's defending this pawn on f4, and it's also threatening knight to g3, which is a strong move, not only checking the king and the rook, but if this pawn here from h2 were to capture, then the rook would fall to the queen here on h6. So Anderssen obviously saw this and he played knight to h4, which is a fantastic move, not only blocking the threat on g3, but at the same time getting ready to bring his knight to f5, gaining a tempo, attacking the queen once again, and also having this nice little outpost on the f5 square. Now black now brought his queen to g5. Logical move, not only attacking the knight here on h4, but also attacking the bishop here on b5. This bishop on b5 is really a thorn in black's side. He really wants to start to develop on the queen side and move this pawn here from d7. So the queen to g5 is attacking both of those. Now Anderssen can just continue with his plan, bringing his knight to f5. Not only having his knight safe, but at the same time, blocking off the bishop on b5 to be captured. Now from here it would have been, the best move if Kieseritzky would have played pawn to g6, kicking off this knight here on f5, because this is a strong outpost for the knight here on f5. But Kieseritzky did not. Instead he played pawn to pawn to c6. Again, really trying to get this bishop out of the way so that the pawn here on d7 can start to push up the board and try to counter as far as center control is, because right now black has no center control. Great thing about Anderssen, and he continued to attack the entire game. Even when his own pieces were being attacked, he decided to counterattack on the other side of the board. And that's exactly what he did. In this case, Anderssen played pawn to g4, attacking the knight here on h5. Now keep in mind that black could play en passant. This is a legal move here, but keep in mind that his queen would be hanging from the bishop on c1. So this was not an option for black. Instead, he decided to go ahead and move his knight back. So he brought his knight back to f6, kind of retreating here, and at the same time he is still putting pressure on this bishop here on b5. Great move from Anderssen. He decided to now bring his rook to g1 here. Obviously he would have liked to right away play his pawn to h4, starting to attack the queen, but the queen and the knight are both attacking this pawn on g4, and so the queen could just come down and take this pawn right away. Anderssen knew this and saw that right away he could bring his rook to g1, and yes, he is sacrificing his bishop on b5, but he can already start to see that the limited spaces that the queen has to move, it's going to be very good for white, very bad for black. So this is exactly what he played, rook to g1, and black decided to go ahead and take the bishop on b5, trying to gain as much material as he can as he tries to get his queen to safety. Now Anderssen continued with his plan. He brought pawn to h4, and again the black king is forced to move, and he only has one place to move, and that is to g6. So white continued to push up the board with pawn to h5, and the only move again black has here is queen to g5. Now that Anderssen starts to have all his pieces in place as he wants them, and he starts to kind of have this queen contained, he starts to get some of his other pieces involved in the game. He now brings his queen to f3, and as you can already see, he's now attacking this pawn right here, and at any given time he can bring his bishop to f4, and the queen's going to be left hanging. There's nothing the queen can do for black to not be taken. So obviously Kieseritzky sees this, and he knows that he has to move his knight now. He has to give his queen some breathing room, or he's going to lose it on the next turn. So he decides to bring his knight to g8. There's really no other good moves. He can't bring it to d7. He can't bring it to d5 or it would be taken. And again, he can't bring it to g4 or h5 without being taken. So he does bring it back to g8, but you can already see after white now comes and takes with his bishop on f4, if you kind of look at the setup here, yes, black is up in material because he did take the bishop from white here on b5, but all of white's pieces are on the back rank here besides the queen that's just being chased around the board, and white's slowly and slowly controlling the entire center, and he's starting to develop all of his pieces on the board. So as you can already see, it's starting to kind of shift for Anderssen's favor, because black just has none of his pieces developed, and the pieces that he does have, he's underdeveloping them back to the 8th rank here. Black doesn't have any other options. He continues to have to run away his queen, and this is again why you don't see at the beginning of the game that queen to h4 checking the king. Yes, it does force the king to move, but as you can see here, a very wise King's Gambit player that's very familiar with white's opening lines is going to have a fun time just chasing your queen around the board the entire game. So from here, white decided to continue and finish his development with knight to c3. All of his minor pieces are in the game. His rooks here are as connected as they're going to be because white cannot castle, and at the same time he does have his queen out in the game. So as you can see here, white is completely controlling the center of the board here, so black really needs to start to develop his pieces. Kieseritzky decided to bring his bishop to c5. He would really like to get his other knight involved in the action. If he could bring his knight to e7 or some sort of play like that, castle on the king side, get some sort of king side safety, because again, he is up in material, but his king is kind of in the center of the board and he's very vulnerable right now. But Kieseritzky decides to bring his bishop to c5, very logical move for development, at the same time attacking this rook here on g1. What black doesn't quite understand is that these rooks aren't really doing too much for the attack, but all these minor pieces in the queen, they have a strong attack that can come later on in the game. But this is a very simple development move, and it's not a bad move. From here, white decided to kind of counterplay. Instead of moving his rook here, he decided to bring his knight to d5. Long time ago when I was learning chess, I always heard, if the king is in the center for your opponent and all of your pieces are in the center, attack, attack, attack. Especially if you're playing the King's Gambit line. You don't play the King's Gambit line to play a passive game. You're really trying to attack, attack, attack. And so that's why Anderssen in this situation played knight to d5. Yes, he is attacking the queen here on f6, but even more importantly, he's attacking knight to c7 check, forking both the king and the rook there on a8, and at the same time the king's still in the middle and he's just waiting to be attacked here. From here, black decided to come down and capture on queen to b2, and white here had a fantastic move. It's probably the crown jewel in the game here. So if you want to pause and take a minute and see if you can come up with the move. But it's bishop to d6, and really what this does is it threatens a lot of different mating opportunities for white, but it's sacrificing both of the rooks here. Obviously you can see the rook here on g1's hanging, along with this, taking with queen to a1, checking the king on f1. White's basically giving up both of these rooks here to bring his bishop to d6 here. Now, it probably would have been a lot smarter if queen came, captured on a1 first, and then after black moved to e2, black can now come to b2, obviously threatening taking on c2, gaining a tempo yet again, so Anderssen would be forced to bring his king to d2, and now the bishop could come down and take on g1. Unfortunately, this is not what was played in the game. It probably would have been better for black, but black decided to go ahead and play bishop takes on g1. And after the bishop came down to g1, this is kind of the dagger in the coffin. The pawn now came to e5, and what this does from white, it does one simple thing, but it's huge in the game because it now restricts this queen here on b2 to get into the game. This queen can no longer defend the king up here, and it's only a matter of time before Anderssen can just completely dominate as far as checkmating the king. It's in the center of the board, and he has all of his pieces in the center of the board to attack the king. From here, black decided to bring his queen to a1, and after the king came to e2, a lot of people say that Kieseritzky actually resigned in the game right away. Partly due to the fact that it's been said that Anderssen announced the mating moves in the game, which I always think is kind of funny if you're playing a master on the chessboard, just in the middle of the game to say you lost, and just say, let me show you how I'm about to beat you, and then just have your opponent just forfeit. I think that'd be really funny. But to show what the actual mate that was announced is, we'll go ahead and continue on the board. Black brings his knight to a6, and then white has a very nice mating net here. He brings his knight to g7, attacking the king here. The king only has one move, bringing his king to d8, and now just to kind of add salt to the wound, brings his queen to f6. Black is now forced to capture with his knight, and now the bishop can come to e7 checkmate. So a fantastic move. If you look at it, white is down a queen, two rooks, and a bishop in material, and at the same time was able to win a game against a very strong master here. So this is a fantastic example of how attacking, sacrificing can go well for you. Obviously it can go bad sometimes, but if you have a strong attack, especially if your opponent's king is in the center of the board, you can continue to attack and good things can happen. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the Immortal game, one of the greatest chess games ever played. Obviously that's debatable what the greatest game is ever, but this is the Immortal game. So hopefully you enjoyed, hopefully you learned something. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.